The town of Hollow Creek, Maine, never appeared on most maps. Tucked between endless miles of forest and a crooked river that ran black under the moonlight, it was the kind of place people drove through without stopping. A handful of houses leaned against each other like weary old men, their paint peeling, their porches sagging. The gas station doubled as the grocery store, the barber shop, and sometimes even the sheriff's office when Deputy Harris didn't feel like walking across the street. Outsiders didn't come to Hollow Creek, and locals never left. But every autumn, when the nights stretched longer and the wind carried the smell of wet leaves and wood smoke, something happened. Something no one in town wanted to talk about. People went missing. It had started decades ago. First, a young woman walking home after her shift at the diner, then a boy who had been camping with his father, then an entire family whose farmhouse still stood abandoned, dishes left on the table as if they'd meant to return. Year after year, Hollow Creek lost someone. Sometimes a stranger passing through, sometimes one of their own. No one ever came back. 28-year-old Clara Jennings, a freelance journalist from Boston, had heard the whispers about Hollow Creek in the most unlikely of places, a college forum about American folklore. Someone had posted an old newspaper clipping about a disappearance from 1983, followed by grainy black and white photographs of Hollow Creek's main street. The comments spiraled into theories, cults, serial killers, even supernatural entities. Clara wasn't the type to buy into ghost stories, but she knew a marketable story when she saw one. True crime mixed with local legend. That was exactly the kind of thing people ate up these days. So one gray October afternoon, Clara's car rolled into Hollow Creek. The sign at the edge of town was riddled with bullet holes. The paint faded to nearly nothing. She slowed to a crawl, her eyes darting from the cracked sidewalks to the boarded-up windows. The place looked less like a town and more like a memory someone had tried to forget. She parked in front of the Hollow Creek Diner, its neon sign buzzing faintly. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and fried bacon. A handful of locals sat in booths, their eyes shifting toward her the moment she entered. Clara could feel the weight of their stares, curiosity mixed with something darker, something close to suspicion. The waitress, a tired-looking woman in her 40s with deep lines around her eyes, approached with a notepad. Her name tag read Marge. "Passing through," Marge asked flatly. "Actually, I'm a journalist," Clara said, sliding into a booth. "I'm doing a piece on Hollow Creek. Heard some stories." The room went quiet. Even the old man at the counter stopped stirring his coffee. Marge's hand tightened on her notepad, and for a second Clara thought she might tell her to leave. Instead, she leaned in closer. "Stories don't do you any good here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "People round here don't like talking about the past." Clara gave a small smile, the kind she used to disarm hesitant sources. "I'm not here to stir trouble, just want to understand what happened. People went missing, right?" Marge's face hardened. "Eat your meal, sweetheart, then head back to Boston." But Clara wasn't going anywhere. That night, she checked into the only motel in town, a sagging two-story building that smelled faintly of mildew. The man at the front desk handed her the key without a word, his eyes avoiding hers. She unpacked, set up her recorder, and began taking notes. At exactly midnight, Clara was woken by a sound. At first she thought it was the wind rattling the windows, but then she heard it again. A low, dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled across the pavement. Heart hammering, she peeked through the blinds. On the street below, under the flickering yellow light of a street lamp, stood a figure. Tall, thin, its body swaying slightly as though caught in a breeze. Its head was tilted upward, staring directly at her window. Clara froze. For a moment she thought she was imagining it, that her brain was conjuring shadows. But then the figure lifted its arm, jerky, unnatural, and pointed at her. The next second the streetlight went out. When Clara dared to look again, the figure was gone. She barely slept the rest of the night, her mind racing. In the morning, she convinced herself it must have been a trick of exhaustion, a local drunk wandering home. But deep down, she wasn't so sure. The following day, Clara went to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Douglas, a burly man with graying hair, sat behind a desk piled high with paperwork. His badge was tarnished, his uniform wrinkled, as if he'd given up on maintaining appearances years ago. "Disappearing people, that old nonsense," he said with a snort when Clara asked. "Look, lady, Hollow Creek's no different from any other place. Folks leave. Folks don't come back, that's life." "But the numbers," Clara pressed. "I've done the math. Hollow Creek has one of the highest rates of missing persons per capita in the state of Maine. That's not normal." Sheriff Douglas leaned back, his eyes narrowing. "You digging into numbers, Miss Jennings, is gonna make people nervous. Nervous people do stupid things. My advice: drop it." Clara left, frustrated but more determined than ever. She spent the day speaking with locals. Most shut their doors in her face, but a few muttered vague warnings. Some things are better left buried. Don't go near the woods. Don't listen when it calls. That night, Clara decided to explore for herself. She drove to the edge of town where the forest thickened, pulling over near the ruins of what looked like an old brick building. The locals had called it Hollow Creek Asylum, abandoned for nearly 60 years. Its windows were shattered, its roof caved in, ivy crawling up the crumbling walls. Inside, the air was damp and cold. Graffiti covered the peeling plaster, and broken furniture lay scattered like bones. Clara moved cautiously, her flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. She found old medical files in a cabinet, their pages yellow and brittle. Names, dates, diagnoses, paranoid schizophrenia, hysteria, violent delusions. One file caught her eye. Margaret Holloway, admitted 1957. Reported hearing voices from the trees. Disappeared from her cell October 13, 1958. Before Clara could process it, she heard the sound again, that dragging noise, slow and deliberate. It echoed through the empty halls. She swung her flashlight wildly, heart pounding. At the far end of the corridor, something moved. A figure impossibly tall, its limbs too long, its movements jerky, like a marionette controlled by invisible strings. Its face, or what should have been a face, was a void of darkness. Clara stumbled back, nearly dropping her flashlight. The figure began to advance, its head twitching in sharp, unnatural motions. She turned and ran, her footsteps echoing against the broken tile. Behind her, the dragging sound grew louder, faster, closing in. She burst out of the asylum and into the woods, her breath ragged. The trees loomed like black towers, their branches clawing at the sky. She didn't stop running until she saw the faint glow of her car headlights. By the time she slammed the door shut and locked it, the woods were silent again. But she knew one thing for certain: Hollow Creek's story wasn't just folklore. Something was very, very wrong here, and it had already noticed her. The following morning, Clara awoke to the sound of heavy rain hammering against the motel window. She sat up in bed, her body aching from the frantic sprint through the woods the night before. For a moment, she almost convinced herself it had been a nightmare brought on by exhaustion. but the mud still caked on her shoes said otherwise. She made her way to the diner again, notebook in hand. The same faces stared at her when she walked in, but this time the stares carried something sharper, like they already knew she had seen too much. Marge set a cup of coffee in front of her without asking. "You went up there, didn't you?" Marge's voice was a harsh whisper. Clara blinked. "Up where?" "The asylum." Marge's eyes darted around the room. "People say if you see it, if it sees you, there's no going back." Clara leaned closer. "What is it?" Marge hesitated, her fingers tightening on the coffee pot. "My sister disappeared in 1989. She worked nights at the mill. Came home one morning babbling about someone following her, tall and wrong-looking. Said she heard her name being called from the trees. A week later she was gone. Cops said she probably ran off, but I know better." Clara scribbled the details in her notebook, her pulse racing. "You're saying people see this thing before they disappear?" Marge nodded. "Always in October, always when the nights are longest. Some say it's the forest itself, some say it's a punishment. Others think it's what's left of those poor souls from the asylum, twisted by something darker." Before Clara could press further, the sheriff walked in. His boots slammed against the linoleum floor as he scanned the diner. His eyes landed on Clara and his jaw tightened. "Miss Jennings," he said, his voice like gravel. "A word outside." Clara followed him reluctantly into the rain. He leaned close, his voice low and threatening. "I told you to leave this alone. You're digging where you shouldn't. You keep pushing and you won't like what you find." "Are you threatening me?" Clara asked, her voice shaking but defiant. Sheriff Douglas didn't answer. He just turned, climbed into his cruiser and drove off, tires splashing water across the road. That night, Clara couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on her. The storm had knocked out the motel's power, and the halls were pitch black. As she fumbled with her flashlight, she heard it again, the dragging sound. Only this time it was inside the building. She pressed her ear to the door. Silence. Then slowly a whisper slid through the cracks of the wood. "Clara!" Her heart froze. No one in Hollow Creek knew her name. She hadn't told them. She backed away from the door, fumbling for her recorder. When she switched it on, the whisper stopped. But in the faint glow of the flashlight, she saw something scrawled across the motel's wallpaper, written in dripping black streaks. "October takes what it's OWED." The next morning, Clara knew she needed answers from someone who wasn't terrified into silence. She drove out of town to a farmhouse on the edge of the forest, where an old man named Elias Crow was rumored to be the last surviving staff member of Hollow Creek Asylum. Elias answered the door slowly, his hunched frame silhouetted against the dark interior. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles, his eyes pale and clouded. "You're here about them," he rasped. Clara nodded. "The disappearances, the asylum. What happened there?" Elias gestured her inside. The house smelled of dust and wood smoke, old photographs covering every wall. He poured her a glass of water with trembling hands. "It began long before the asylum," he said. "This land was never right. The Penobscot tribes warned settlers not to build here. They said the woods belonged to something older, something that feeds when the leaves turn red. But the town didn't listen. They cut trees, built houses, dug wells. And then people started hearing voices in the forest." Clara's pen flew across the page. "And the asylum? They thought the voices were madness, so they locked people up. Men, women, children said they were delusional. But I worked there and I'll tell you the truth, those patients weren't sick. They were hearing the same thing we all hear if we stay long enough. The call." "The call?" Clara asked. Elia's eyes filled with tears. a whisper in the trees. It tells you to come closer, to give yourself to it, and once you hear it, it doesn't stop. It doesn't stop until you're gone. A shiver ran down Clara's spine. And the figure. The tall one I saw, Elias gripped her wrist with surprising strength. That's the Hollow Man. That's what the call becomes when it takes shape. Some say it's the spirit of the land. Some say it's the souls of everyone it's claimed, twisted together. Whatever it is, it knows you now, and it won't let you leave. Clara pulled her hand free, her heart racing. I have to document this. People need to know. Elias shook his head violently. No, if you spread its name, if more eyes look this way, it grows stronger. That's why the town stays silent. That's why we let it take one every year. Better one than all. The old man's words rattled Clara as she drove back toward town. The rain had stopped, but the forest seemed darker than ever, every tree a looming sentinel. As she rounded a bend, she slammed on the brakes. Standing in the middle of the road was the Hollow Man. Its body was impossibly thin, its limbs too long, its head cocked at an unnatural angle. It didn't move, didn't blink. But as Clara stared, she felt it, an invasive pressure inside her skull, a whisper curling into her thoughts. Clara, come closer. She gunned the engine, swerving around it, refusing to look back. But in the rearview mirror, she caught a glimpse. The Hollow Man wasn't on the road anymore. It was standing in the backseat. Clara screamed and slammed the brakes again, jerking around, only to find the backseat empty. Her chest heaved, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. She drove the rest of the way without daring to blink. That night, as she replayed her recorder, she froze. Between the sounds of her questions and Elia's gravelly voice, she heard something else. A faint whisper, "We see you now." Clara barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw it. The Hollow Man's long fingers brushing against the motel window, its eyeless face pressing close as if trying to seep inside. She woke drenched in sweat, her ears ringing with faint whispers she couldn't shake. By morning, she was exhausted but more determined than ever. She set up her laptop, piecing together everything she'd learned. The asylum, the disappearances, Elias' warnings. But she needed proof, hard evidence. Something she could bring back to Boston that people couldn't dismiss as folklore. Her research led her to the county archives in the neighboring town of Ashford. The building was musty and half-forgotten, manned by a single clerk who seemed grateful anyone cared about their dusty records. Clara spent hours combing through files until she found what she needed: sealed documents from Hollow Creek Asylum, 1950s, 1960s. The reports were disturbing. Patients weren't just treated, they were experimented on. Electroshock therapy, sensory deprivation, even rituals described in vague, coded language. One report, dated October 12, 1958, described a containment attempt. It spoke of an entity manifesting within patient delusions, a shadow form that appeared during group sessions. Staff had tried to bind it, through both medical and alternative means. The next day, Margaret Holloway vanished from her locked cell. Clara snapped photos of every page. The asylum hadn't just housed the mentally ill, it had tried to control something supernatural. And it had failed. On her drive back, the fog rolled in thick, swallowing the road. She slowed, headlights cutting through the gray, but the world seemed to close in tighter with every mile. Her radio crackled with static, then faintly her own voice. "I have to document this. People need to know." Clara's hands tightened on the wheel. That was her interview with Elias, but she hadn't played it. The recorder was off. The radio wasn't connected to anything. The static rose into a chorus of whispers. "Clara, Clara," she slapped the radio off, her breath ragged. But the voices didn't stop. They filled the car, crawling into her skull, pulling her focus toward the trees lining the road. Shapes moved in the fog, dozens of them. Figures, tall and thin, swaying like reeds in the wind. Clara pressed harder on the gas, refusing to look. By the time she reached the motel, she was shaking so badly she dropped her keys twice before unlocking the door. Inside, she collapsed on the bed, clutching her recorder. For the first time, fear outpaced her curiosity. She thought about packing up, driving away, abandoning the story. But then she remembered Marge's haunted eyes, Elia's trembling voice, the dozens of names in those asylum files. People had disappeared for decades, their stories buried in silence. If she left, the Hollow Man would keep taking. Someone had to speak. That night, Clara returned to the asylum. The forest swallowed her flashlight beam, branches snapping underfoot as she approached the crumbling brick structure. Her breath clouded in the cold air. Every step closer, the whispers grew louder, until they weren't in her ears anymore, they were in her head. "We've been waiting, come closer, inside." The asylum was worse than before. The graffiti seemed to shift when she wasn't looking. The hallways stretched longer, as if the building itself was rearranging to trap her. In the basement, she found something she hadn't seen before. A heavy steel door, its paint rusted, a broken chain dangling from the handle. With a grunt, she forced it open. The room beyond was circular, its walls covered in strange symbols, half medical diagrams, half occult markings. In the center sat a chair bolted to the floor, leather straps dangling. The air was thick with the stench of mold and rot. Clara's flashlight flickered. For a split second, she saw them. Dozens of patients strapped to chairs, their mouths open in silent screams, their bodies pale and transparent, as if frozen between life and death. Then the light steadied and the room was empty again. Her recorder clicked on by itself. A voice hissed through it, low and inhuman. "You opened the door. Now you belong here." The steel door slammed shut behind her. Clara spun, yanking at the handle. It wouldn't budge. Panic surged, her chest tightening. The whispers rose into a cacophony, echoing in every corner of the room. She pressed her back to the wall, her flashlight shaking wildly. And then it stepped into the beam. The Hollow Man. It was closer than it had ever been. Its body towered over her, limbs bent at wrong angles, fingers dragging against the floor. Its head twitched in sharp, unnatural jerks, as though it struggled to hold itself together. Clara's breath came in short gasps. Every instinct screamed to look away, but she couldn't. The Hollow Man raised its hand slowly, almost gently, and pressed one long finger to where its mouth should have been. "SHHH," the whispers stopped. The silence was worse. Clara's vision blurred, her knees buckling. For a moment, she felt herself slipping, drawn into that endless void where its face should be. She saw images flash before her eyes. The missing people wandering the woods, their bodies hollowed out, their eyes gone. She saw herself among them, her voice joining the chorus of whispers. With a surge of desperation, she screamed and hurled her flashlight at the creature. The beam fractured, scattering light across the walls. The Hollow Man shrieked, not with sound but with pressure, like her skull was splitting. The steel door burst open. Clara didn't think. She ran, through the basement, through the halls, out into the forest. Branches tore at her clothes, roots tripped her feet, but she didn't stop until the asylum was a fading shadow behind her. She collapsed by her car, sobbing, her throat raw. The recorder was still running. When she played it back, her stomach dropped. It hadn't captured her scream, or her footsteps, or the hollow man. All it recorded was a voice, her own voice. "I can't escape. I belong to it now." Clara didn't remember driving back to town. One moment she was collapsed against her car outside the asylum, shaking. The next she was stumbling into her motel room, the recorder still clenched in her fist. Her reflection in the bathroom mirror nearly made her scream, her skin pale, her eyes bloodshot, her lips trembling as if she had been whispering all night long. She washed her face again and again, but the feeling wouldn't leave. Something had followed her. The next morning she packed her bag. Enough was enough. She had photos, documents, recordings, even if they were tainted with strange voices. It was enough to write her story. She'd leave Hollow Creek behind, publish everything, and expose the truth. But the road out of town had other plans. As she drove, the forest seemed endless, the same stretch of trees repeating no matter how far she went. The gas gauge dipped lower and lower until the engine sputtered. Clara pulled over, panicking. When she checked her GPS, the screen was nothing but static. And then she saw it again, in the rearview mirror. The hollow man, standing in the middle of the road, closer than ever. Its head jerked side to side in sharp, sickening motions. Clara slammed her eyes shut, whispering to herself, "It's not real, it's not real." When she opened them, the road was empty. By the time she made it back to town, the sun was dipping low, the sky painted in blood-red streaks. She stormed into the diner, slamming her notebook on the counter. "What is this place?" she demanded. "Why does no one leave? Why does it keep taking people?" The room went silent. The few locals present exchanged nervous glances. Marge stepped forward, her voice low and heavy. "Because that's the deal," she said. Clara blinked. "The deal?" Marge's hands shook as she poured herself a cup of coffee. "My grandparents were here when the first settlers cut into these woods. People went missing right away. The town leaders went into the forest, desperate to beg for mercy. They came back different, quiet, but after that, only one person disappeared each year. Just one, as long as we don't fight it, as long as we let it take what it's owed." Clara stared at her in disbelief. "You're telling me you've been sacrificing people, letting this thing kill for decades?" "It's better than the alternative," Marge whispered. "When people resisted, when outsiders brought police here in the 70s, it took an entire search party. 15 men, gone in one night. The deal keeps the rest of us alive." Clara's stomach twisted. She realized the truth. The sheriff, the townsfolk, even Elias, they weren't just scared. They were complicit. They'd learned to live with it, to look away, to feed the hollow man one life a year in exchange for their own survival. "You people are insane," Clara spat. "You think silence keeps you safe. It doesn't. It makes you prisoners." Marge's eyes glistened with tears. "And you think exposing it will save you? Once it marks you, there's no way out. It doesn't stop. It doesn't forget." That night, Clara tried again to leave. She borrowed a local's truck, drove straight west instead of north, ignoring the main highway. But every turn brought her back to Hollow Creek. Every dirt road dead-ended in the forest. Hours passed, and still she ended up in the same place. The gas station's dim neon glow, flickering against the dark. The hollow man didn't even bother hiding now. She saw it on rooftops, in fields, at the edge of the motel parking lot. Always still, always watching. Her body felt weaker every day, as though the longer she stayed, the more it hollowed her out. By the fourth night, Clara woke to find words carved into her motel wall. Deep scratches gouged into the plaster, forming one chilling sentence. "You're next." Her recorder clicked on by itself. Her own voice whispered from the speaker, I can't fight it anymore." Clara dropped it, covering her ears. "No, that's not me, that's not me." But when she looked down, the recorder was gone. The next day, she returned to Elia's, desperate for answers. The old man sat in his rocking chair, eyes distant as if he'd been waiting. "You feel it now, don't you?" he rasped. "The pull, it's in your blood." "Tell me how to stop it," Clara demanded. "There has to be a way." Elias shook his head slowly. "The only way is to give it someone else, a trade. That's how the town survives. That's how I survived this long. Every year it needs a body, and now it's chosen you." Clara staggered back. "You're saying I have to kill someone?" Elia's voice cracked. "It doesn't care how. As long as the forest drinks, you sacrifice one, you live. If you don't, it takes you, and it's a worse fate than death." Clara felt bile rise in her throat. Sacrifice someone. Become just like them, complicit in decades of silence and blood. She couldn't. She wouldn't. But that night, the hollow man came closer than ever. She woke to find it standing in her motel room. Its body loomed over her bed, its head nearly scraping the ceiling. Fingers like branches brushed against her cheek, the void where its face should have been pulsed, drawing her in. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe, and then it spoke. Not through whispers, not through the recorder, out loud. "Choose." Clara bolted upright, gasping, the room empty again. But the word lingered in her skull, echoing like a curse. Choose. She knew then what part 5 of her story would be. Not the ending she had planned, but the ending the hollow man demanded. The old asylum loomed before Claire like a blackened scar against the forest skyline. Its rotting spires and broken windows resembled jagged teeth gnashing at the sky, as though the building itself had been designed to devour hope. The gate creaked open with an unnatural ease, as if the asylum had been expecting her, welcoming her return. Claire tightened her grip on the flashlight and stepped into the courtyard, the crunch of leaves beneath her boots muffled by the wind's mournful whistle. The walls were etched with time and graffiti, but beneath the spray paint, words carved deep into stone read. "We never left." Inside, the air was suffocating, thick with mildew, dust, and something metallic. Claire's breath fogged the stale air as she moved deeper, each step stirring echoes that didn't sound like her own. Broken wheelchairs rusted in corners, patient files scattered across the floor, pages yellowed and brittle. But the deeper she went, the clearer it became that she wasn't alone. Shadows slid across the hallways, some darting just outside her vision, others lingering in plain sight, watching. At the center of the asylum was a great stairwell spiraling into the earth. Claire shone her light downward, but the beam was devoured by blackness. A sound drifted upward, whispers, layered and endless, dozens of voices speaking in unison. Some pleaded for help, others laughed with a guttural glee. She descended, one trembling step at a time, her hand brushing along the cold iron railing slick with dampness. At the bottom, she entered a cavernous chamber that should not have existed beneath the asylum. Stone walls stretched outward, carved with symbols far older than the building above. In the middle, a pit yawned open, its depth impossible to measure. And surrounding the pit were the missing townsfolk, the Hollow Pines residents who had vanished over decades. Their eyes were vacant, their faces pale and stretched thin, as though they had been drained of life. Yet their mouths moved, repeating the chant Claire had heard in her dreams. Standing among them was a leaner Gray, but she was no longer the girl from the faded photograph. She was tall, towering unnaturally, her body warped and skeletal, skin stretched tight over sharp bones. Her eyes glowed with an inhuman red light, her mouth splitting wide into a grin that tore at the seams of her face. "You came," Eleanor crooned, her voice a choir of broken echoes. "You followed the whispers like all the others." Claire raised the flashlight, her hand shaking. "What are you?" she demanded, her voice quivering but firm. "I am what this town was built upon," Eleanor hissed. "The first settlers knew. They fed me. They built their homes atop my veins, and every autumn the forest calls the debt." The pit roared to life, a wind rushing upward so powerful it nearly knocked Claire off her feet. From the darkness within, massive shapes writhed, serpentine limbs, jagged claws, the shifting suggestion of something incomprehensibly vast. The townsfolk swayed in unison, their chant growing louder. Claire's mind screamed at her to flee, but her feet rooted to the floor. Her entire life had led her here, the articles, the nightmares, the voices calling her name. She realized with a sickening clarity that she had not uncovered the mystery. She had been chosen. Eleanor stretched out her hand, bone-thin fingers curling like talons. "Join us, Claire. The town will forget your name as it has forgotten theirs. You will be the next echo in the hollow." Claire's heart pounded as she raised her recorder and hit play. The sound of her own voice filled the chamber, her interviews, her questions, her defiance captured in hours of recordings. The chant faltered for a moment, the townsfolk pausing mid-sway. Eleanor's grin faltered, her body twitching. The ancient thing in the pit recoiled, the whispers shifting to shrieks. The sound of truth, of memory, disrupted the endless cycle. Claire screamed into the recorder, her voice raw, filled with every ounce of defiance left in her. "This story will be heard." The chamber erupted in chaos. The townsfolk convulsed, their hollow eyes flickering with fragments of recognition. Eleanor shrieked, a sound like shattering glass. The pit writhed violently, shadows tearing at the walls. Claire bolted for the stairwell, the recorder still blaring her voice. The asylum trembled, stones cracking, the earth itself roaring in fury. She didn't look back until she reached the forest. Behind her, the asylum collapsed in on itself, swallowed whole by the earth. The ground sealed shut, leaving nothing but a scar of scorched earth where the building once stood. Claire stumbled into the streets of Hollow Pines at dawn, the town eerily silent. Not a single resident remained. The houses stood empty, their windows blank like staring eyes. It was as though the entire population had been erased. Her car still sat at the edge of town. She climbed inside, hands trembling as she gripped the wheel. Before driving away, she played back her recorder. Static, only static. Her voice, the interviews, the screams, all gone. But just as she switched it off, one final whisper bled through the static, soft and cold against her ear. "We never left." Claire fled Hollow Pines, but she knew the truth. The town, the asylum, the pit, none of it was gone. It was waiting. And it would call again.